Fall Education Conference. Today's gathering is titled Revolutionary Tactics and Strategy. We acknowledge that this event takes place on the unceded territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit and Haudenosaunee people, and on indigenous lands of Turtle Island. We join in the fight for justice, recognizing that there can be no real reconciliation without restitution. That entails seizing the assets of the big resource corporations and returning them to the commons. Around the world, millions of workers are demanding proper health care, a living wage for all, affordable housing, an end to the Zionist genocide against Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, an end to the imperialist war in Ukraine, and an end to destruction of the environment. My name is Elizabeth Weiss. I'm a retired member of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, Federal Treasurer, the NDP Socialist Caucus, and a leading member of Socialist Action, and your host for today. Currently, we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the founding of Socialist Action in Canada. This education conference features speakers from across the country. I hope you enjoy it. If you want to change the world, please get directly involved in our party. We warmly invite you to join Socialist Action. Sisters and brothers, comrades and friends, once again, welcome to the 17th Socialist Action Fall Education Conference with its audience at the Opsu Centre in Toronto, who's across Turtle Island, including those who will see the video recording of this event on the FA YouTube channel. Our agenda consists of the following sessions. The one that's coming up shortly is Class Struggle Versus Populism with speakers Jeff Mackler and Barry Weisleder. At 3 p.m., we're going to have session 2, the NDP. If we ignore it, will it go away? What is to be done? The speakers are Dirka Prout in London, Ontario, Tom Baker in Hamilton, Gary Porter in Victoria, BC, and Josh Floyd in New Brunswick. And at 5 o'clock, our third and final session, What It Means to Be a Revolutionary Socialist, with speakers Rubina Chowdhury and from Windsor, John Wilson, a founder of the National Gay Liberation Movement, and DB, a student in Southern Ontario. But before we get to our speakers, we are honored to begin this conference with the poetry of Patrick Connors, who is based in Toronto, is published in Dissident Voice, and recently became a supporter of Socialist Action. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Elizabeth. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you very much, Barry, for inviting me. I'm always glad to read for an audience of people who are going to appreciate my poetry. I'm known in Toronto and beyond as being a socialist poet, and when I get up on stage, people roll their eyes and say, oh boy, here's Connors, here he goes again. Hopefully what I'm doing here today will resonate with some of you, and thank you very much for listening to me. Of course, somebody on Zoom was saying about how we have the California weather. And here we are in November. The sky was very low yesterday, and it looked like it wanted to snow, but of course it was 11 degrees, so there was no way it was going to snow. The world is on fire. It's hotter than it's ever been. British Columbia's forests are ablaze, burning centuries of growth, killing innocent animals, threatens the communities, the very fabric of the civilization that produced the pollution and caused the greenhouse gases, which raise the temperature of our planet. The wind blows plumes of acrid smoke over the Rocky Mountains, across the prairies, under the waterline, through the 6 o'clock news, blots the sky with ashen cover that turns the setting sun into a dire warning. California also burns, and Greece too. Catastrophic flooding in Africa and Europe and New York and New Jersey, so-called 500-year events that are happening with increased frequency. Just when it seems it can't get worse, Greenland's ice summit witnesses rain for the first time in recorded history. It's incredible in a city and a country where there's so much austerity with food and so much insecurity with food, and I'm very, very troubled by that. And it's what led me to write this poem, Downtime. She turned the key to her apartment door. She wished this was the end of her day, a chance to put on sweats and collapse. But she only had enough of a break to make dinner for her children. She took time to say hello. What are you watching on TV? Is your homework done? She processed the mail, mostly bills, as well as answering machine messages offering extra shifts she couldn't take because she already had to work. In the refrigerator, she found butter, orange juice, and a wilted head of lettuce. In the cupboard was one lonely can of beef stew. She would have to find something to eat at her overnight job and go to the food bank in the morning when she would usually sleep. Her son tugged at her pant leg. She softly said she was getting his dinner ready before she went back to work. He cried and begged her to stay. Her daughter used a hockey stick to slap a tennis ball against the bare wall where her grandmother's china cabinet used to be. Would you both please stop? She asked. But her son cried more, and her daughter's slap shots got louder. As the stew was about to start simmering, the power went out. She slammed the spatula against the stove. I didn't graduate university to end up like this. And this one is sort of the lightest of the three poems. It's satire on elections. Of course, we just had an election south of the border that I'm assuming that nobody here is too happy about. And we're probably going to have elections both at the provincial and the federal level within the next year as well. So this is sort of a tongue-in-cheek look. Imagine if somebody was giving instructions or lessons to the incoming leader. This is the outgoing leader. Exit poll, advice to the new leader. 1. Promises are made to be broken like rotten eggs, but not until the morning after the election. 2. The current state of affairs is merely your reaction to mistakes others have made in the past. 3. Give the people what they want. Visions of fresh young faces, sunny summer picnics, and reduced deficit spending. But don't let them realize a better tomorrow. 4. Because the next administration will have to take it back. 5. Fiscal restraint is what makes our civilization great, or at least it will keep the current system chugging along a bit longer. 6. A balanced budget should almost make up for all those pesky poor people. Thank you very much for listening to me and for letting me participate in this very important conference. I hope my words resonated with you, and I hope it sets the table for a very, very important day of learning for us.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And now we will get on to the first session, which is Class Struggle Versus Populism. And our first speaker is Comrade Jeff Mackler. He's the National Secretary of Socialist Action USA. He was the Socialist Action candidate for the U.S. President in 2016 and 2020. I don't know why he didn't run this year. He might have won. He is the director of the Mobilization to Free Mumia Abu Jamal, Northern California, a National Steering Committee member of the Julian Assange Defense Committee, and an Administrative Committee member and co-founder of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. Please welcome Comrade Jeff.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and I can't tell you how much joy it brings to my heart to be with my Canadian co-thinkers. When I see your faces, I realize how important our international project is, and that is to build mass revolutionary socialist parties that challenge capitalist rule. One of my assignments is to talk about the presidential election in the United States, but frankly, I forgot to look at the newspaper and I don't know who won the election. Does anybody in the audience have any idea who won the US election?
Nobody good.
Well, the opening sentence of my article says that the US ruling class won the election. There was no serious election in the United States. Ruling class allocated a mere $10 billion in campaign finances to line the coffers of the media. It was the largest allocation by $2 billion ever spent on US elections. And it featured two ruling class candidates, or I should say, two candidates who are absolutely bound to every aspect of capitalist rule. What do I mean by capitalist rule? In the United States, 100% of the major corporations are owned by the 1%. The military-industrial complex, the largest in the world by far, including probably the expenditures of the whole world combined, is monopolized by a handful of corporations that produce the weapons of mass destruction that the United States deploys in 110 countries at 1,100 military bases around the world. They are monopolized, but most comrades have no idea what that means. It means that the ruling class literally controls the prices of everything. They make a $2 million or billion jet plane and sell it for 1,000 times more because there is no competition. And this is not just my speculation. This is the top executives in the military who basically produce the weapons of mass destruction that destroy the world. Last week, the Democratic Party's candidate, representing, quote, liberal democracy, Kamala Harris, announced that her opponent, Donald Trump, was a fascist. That was 2 weeks before the vote. But an hour or two after the fascist Trump was declared president, Kamala Harris called him up to congratulate him on his victory. Imagine that. In plain talk, here you have the leading Democrat candidate calling yesterday's fascist to congratulate him on being the president of the United States and winning the election fair and square. I don't know if comrades appreciate the horror in that statement. Kamala Harris was posed as a liberal. Her history is a right-wing cop, the head of the California criminal justice system, the person who prosecuted the oppressed and put them in jail in disproportion to white people, the person who presided over the largest prison industrial complex in the world, with 2 million people incarcerated and many relegated to participating in near slave labor jobs at an average of 50 cents an hour. Why pay workers union wages? Why pay immigrants immigrant wages when you can have a prisoner working for 50 cents an hour? Let's go a little bit deeper. Why pay even slave wages to prison labor when you can build a factory in China and use teenage dormitory female factory workers at 6 cents an hour, working 80-hour weeks with no unions. That was the central reason why the United States negotiated with China to allow China entry into the World Trade Organization some 20 years ago. And that is, the Chinese capitalist imperialists agreed that the price of their admission would be to open their factories and allow American corporations to use near slave labor Chinese workers in order to more effectively compete on world markets. That Trump is a fascist has no meaning in the real world. Trump is nothing but a cheap, lying, raping, criminally indicted, stealing capitalist who today, now that he is elected president, will pardon himself for all of his crimes. And there won't be more than a blink of an eye. Donald Trump is a, quote, effing moron. According to Rex Tillerson, his former Secretary of State, one of the richest capitalists in the world, who was appointed when Trump was president to be U.S. Secretary of State to oversee U.S. business in the Middle East, and that is U.S. oil. And at a special Security Council meeting where Trump made the famous statement, I would like to increase the number of tactical nuclear weapons 100-fold, and he left the meeting. Tillerson commented in front of everyone, the guy's a effing moron. And that is the idea the United States needed a 100-fold increase in tactical nuclear weapons. But morons are the norm. When a group of the largest powerful corporations and banks in the world met, literally the 10 or 12 richest corporations in the world, met and decided before Obama became a president, but George Bush was still president. They decided that unless the United States Congress passed a bill that day to grant a multi-trillion-dollar bailout to failing banks and corporations, the U.S. economy would immediately collapse. They sent the delegation headed by the Federal Reserve Chair and by the Treasury Secretary, and they stopped by George Bush's office. And they said, here's the 2-page bailout proposal from the richest people on earth, and we're going to present it today before the U.S. Congress. And if it doesn't pass, the entire U.S. economy will instantly collapse. The moron George Bush's comment was revealing. He said, why didn't anybody tell me? But the United States was not aware that the U.S. economy was teetering on bankruptcy is telling. The same delegation went before Congress, and within a day, they passed the largest bailout bill in the history of the world. There is no such thing as an honest U.S. president. Recently, I watched a Paramount film called Mafia Spies. It was produced by one of the major movie corporations, and it dealt with the fact, and it documented using recent FBI files, that the Kennedy administration worked openly with the CIA and the Chicago-based mafia to organize the assassination of Cuba. multiple assassination attempts. It also documented that the President of the United States shared a mafia prostitute, including multiple visits of this prostitute to the White House. It also documented in detail that at the request of the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the mafia intervened in the Chicago presidential election count to grant votes to Kennedy that were his opposition's votes, making Kennedy the President of the United States. John F. Kennedy was touted as the champion of American liberalism, featured with Dr. Martin Luther King. What the documentary didn't report, but another one on television, reported that his father, a basic dealer in gambling, prostitution, and so on in Massachusetts, who was at the time appointed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the US president, to be the US ambassador to England during the war. And when JFK's father met, literally, with representatives of Hitler's fascist Germany in the 1930s, Roosevelt felt it was necessary to withdraw him. The same thing with every single presidential candidate. William Clinton was a Southern racist bigot, as was Jimmy Carter. But when the Republicans absorbed the Southern racist Democrats into the Republican Party, and the Democrats needed some Southern votes, they transformed Clinton and Carter into Southern liberals, former segregationists. Carter was the head of a segregated church. His first position was a school board member in a racist school board in his state, where he approved legislation to bus white kids past the black schools that they had otherwise been appointed to. There isn't a single president who wasn't in the pay of the ruling class. Not one made independent decisions based on the needs of the American people. All are and continue to be subordinate to the capitalist system, which by definition is a system that fosters, that defends, that advances the private capitalist interests of the 1% at the extent of the interests of the vast majority. So the fact that the US left was terribly divided in this election, with the vast majority supporting Kamala Harris, is telling. It tells us that the US left is the weakest at any point in my lifetime. It tells us that the US left supported an openly genocidal, mass murdering capitalist administration that destroyed some 45,000, some say 150,000 Palestinians in order to advance the interests of the US oil corporations in the Middle East. It tells us that Kamala Harris, in order to counter what she thought was the racist views of Americans on immigration, approved, with Biden's help, an immigration bill that provided for more reactionary provisions than Trump ever imagined, and used this bill to expose Trump for not being anti-immigrant enough. It's the same with the climate crisis. She adopted, at the pressure of the monopolized oil industry, legislation that advanced fracking. The U.S. is the #1 fracker in the world. And under Kamala Harris, it will continue to be so, qualitatively expanding the same fossil fuel whose future use spells doom for humanity. I noticed that our poet from Canada that preceded me talked about the climate horrors in Canada at the same time that Los Angeles is burning from fossil fuel induced horrors. And the same thing with the rest of the United States. That most major organizations chose in this last US election Kamala Harris, whose background is a racist bigot cop prosecutor in California, whose associates were always the Willie Brown capitalist wing of the Democratic Party, who ruled California in alliance with the Republican Party. That party controls the basic wealth of the state. California is the 5th or 6th richest nation on earth, and Kamala Harris presided over administration that brokered the differences between the ruling class Republicans and the ruling class Democrats. The Democrats and Republicans are richer than you can imagine because they control the fossil fuel industry in California. They control agribusiness, the most powerful business in the state. They control military production in California. They control the courts, they control the legislatures, and they control the politicians, whether they have a liberal Democratic Party cast like the current governor, or Ronald Reagan in the past, or Arnold Schwarzenegger, movie stars who were promoted to foster the interests of the ruling rich. The United States is the largest military power that ever existed in the world. It dominates the world economy, and its troops in 1,100 military bases are there to guarantee the interests of American corporations. The lesser capitalist imperialist country, Russia, has a mere 6 military bases, and China, the largest economic power next to the United States, has but 1 foreign military base in the world, in Djibouti at the Horn of Africa. But China is now deemed by the United States a major competition, the major competition. And it didn't get there because of its socialist politics, which were out the window in the late 1970s. It got there because of the super exploitation of Chinese labor. So much so that the United States corporations decided to follow suit. So under the Obama administration, in order to boost failing profit rates in the face of worldwide competition, the US government decided to offshore fundamental parts of its industrial complex. Why pay union workers in Detroit, or else in the country, union wages that were hard fought and won, when you can offshore your factories to China and have, as I said, teenage dormitory women factory workers working 80-hour weeks at literally 6 cents an hour? And that's not an invention. That was the figure found to be the fact by our Chinese Trotskyist comrades in Hong Kong and in China, working underground. So the whole capitalist system is predicated on extracting profits from working people. And when profits are low, they resort to speed up, to offshoring factories, to union busting, to every single form of super exploitation in order to compete on world markets. When Trump became president, he decided he needed to protect American industry by imposing taxes on Chinese exports. The Democrats initially disagreed because the export of Chinese products was largely from American-owned factories. And the Democratic-owned factories resented the fact that they were going to be taxed or tariffs imposed, regardless of the cost to the American workers. But for political reasons, the Republicans acceded to the demand and they adopted the same tariffs that Trump imposed. And now Trump is going to impose additional tariffs. All of these are the exigencies of the basic functioning of the capitalist system, a corrupt system that exists to exploit workers. And the idea that the US left, in its vast majority, not only the quote left wing in quotes of the Democratic Party, but other groups that call themselves left, groups like the DSA that regularly supports Democrats, the Democratic Socialists of America, or the other groups that were formerly Trotskyists, supported Bernie Sanders. Every single component of the left wing, in quotes, of the Democratic Party, whether it be the New York liberals, Ocasio-Cortez, or whether it be Bernie Sanders, turned around to support, initially, Joseph Biden for president. Let me remind you who Joseph Biden really is. He was in office as a Pennsylvania Democrat for over 50 years. He was the official Democratic Party liaison between the Southern racist former slavocracy and the Northern capitalist liberals. He was personal friends with open segregationists like Strom Thurmond, who left the Democratic Party to form his own party to protest the Democratic Party's accession to civil rights legislation. Biden was a keynote speaker at Strom Thurmond's memorial meeting and a personal friend because the Democrats were the party of racism, segregation, and the Klan at the same time that they were the party of the Northern liberal JFK Democratic Party. There are no principles when it comes to capitalist party politics. The only principle is advancing the interests of the profiteers of the ruling class. Joseph Biden became the instant candidate of the Democratic Party in his first election return, following 5 million people mobilizing in the streets for Black Lives Matter in the context of the police murder on the average of 2 unarmed blacks a day, of innocent blacks by racist police across the country. 5 million people, the largest demonstration in the history of the United States, mobilized. And Biden was part of this racist system. And when he proved to be inadequately winning, in fact, losing the polls that led to the Democrats choosing their candidate, The ruling class, including several billionaires who decided they might want to be president, withdrew instantly and backed Joseph Biden, the racist bigot, as their candidate for president and touted him as the representative of the oppressed Black people. Mobilizing their NGO funded and dominated Black church organization to convert Joseph Biden from a Southern racist bigot into a Northern liberal, pro-civil rights, anti-police brutality, anti-systemic racism candidate. And he was elected. And tragically, at that time, virtually the entire civil rights movement as we know it, not to mention the Latino movement through their churches, that are all fundamentally funded by the capitalist class in return for mobilizing their votes to the Democratic Party. And Biden was elected president of the United States. Needless to say, he increased the number of cops, as he had promised privately to do, rather than abolishing the police. But this brings to mind another point. What does this presidential election tell us about the American people? We could come away with the conclusion that the United States population is moving to the right, that American workers are racist to the core, that they're anti-environment, that they're pro-fracking, that they're oblivious to the horrors of the climate catastrophe, that they want to spend additional billions on war, racism, and poverty. In my opinion, there's no truth in that. First, I point out that Barack Obama was elected president of the United States, a Black man who posed as a liberal and who thought in his naivete early on that he could make some changes in racist America. He was quickly convinced that there was no room for fundamental changes. The same thing with war. Every poll in the United States demonstrates that the American people are against the genocidal slaughter of the Palestinian people. But Kamala Harris supported that, supported the allocation of billions of dollars to the Zionist, colonial, racist, segregationist apartheid regime, because that regime is the gendarme of US capitalism in the Middle East, and that the Harris regime supported not only the current genocide, but its extension to Lebanon, an extension of the bombing to other countries, bombing Iran today, bombing Yemen, bombing Syria, bombing Iraq. That's the policy of the Democratic Party. That's always been the policy of the Democratic Party. The idea of anyone on the left that the United States could be the good guys in Ukraine and the bad guys in the rest of the world could organize a fascist-led, US-backed military coup that annihilated the elected government of Ukraine is a myth. 10 years ago, the US backed a fascist-led coup that abolished the agreement of the Ukrainian government to accept a Russian-based bailout because it was bankrupt, as opposed to a US-backed European Union crushing bailout that would have and has largely crippled the Ukrainian economy. That coup in 2014 banned all majority parties and placed a series of fascist leaders in the top positions in the Ukrainian economy, military, army, agribusiness, and so on. That coup ordered the banning of the Russian language and the mobilization of Ukrainian troops to the eastern Ukraine in order to slaughter anyone who resisted the US-backed fascist coup. That's why in 2014, Socialist Action opposed that US-backed coup.
1 minute, Jeff.
How much? 2? Okay.
1.
So, thanks, Elizabeth. So basically, revolutionary socialists have no interest in backing any aspect of US policy. It was the United States that orchestrated the slaughter of 4 million Vietnamese during the war, that supported Batista's slaughter of 1,000 Cubans, Somoza's slaughter of 50,000 Nicaraguans, Pinochet's slaughter in Chile of 60,000 workers. The same slaughter prevails in every country on earth where the United States has troops. A friend of mine called me yesterday and said, Jeff, I voted for you for president in California the other day. Apparently, he had exercised his write-in provision, write-in privilege. As far as I'm concerned, that one vote made me the president of the United States because I represent the interests of the American people on every critical issue. The American people are less racist than most people on earth. They support democratic rights for everyone, but they are subject to a multi-billion-dollar electoral machine that excludes every idea, every decent idea for humanity, every idea that defends the environment, that brings the races together. We support the construction based on a rebuilt, fighting, militant trade union movement of the Labour Party, something akin to the NDP in Canada, a party that is organized democratically at the point of production in the political arena to defend the interests of working people, of the party that can be controlled by working people. And equally important, we support the construction of a revolutionary socialist party based on cadre that are integrated in helping to lead every single social struggle of our time. A party that champions women's rights from A to Z, the right to abortion and child care, the right to equal pay for equal work. A party that champions the environment, that opposes every penny of the military budget and demands the bringing of all troops home. We're very proud to be collaborating with Socialist Action Canada in this endeavor. We have a wonderful group of comrades. And I'll only add, just in the last 2 weeks, 5 people have asked to join our party, including the organizing director of AssangeDefense.org. We helped found the Julian Assange Committee. And Julian is free today because of the mobilizations that we've organized. We defend every. We call for the freedom of Mumia Abu Jamal and organized demonstrations of 25,000 to free Mumia. We helped lead and found the United National Anti-War Coalition, which issued a statement yesterday condemning both capitalist imperialist parties and called for mobilization to challenge the policies of the new president of the United States. There is no social struggle that we are not actively engaged in because we understand that only the capitalist system at the hands of the vast majority of the American working class, in alliance with all the oppressed and exploited, can change the horrors that are attendant to and inherent in the capitalist system. We're proud to be working with you, comrades. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you, comrade. Okay, our next speaker, of course, gets the usual 30 minutes, but unfortunately, he will get less because we're running a little over time. So we're going to cut him down by 2 or 3 minutes if that's possible. Okay, our next speaker is Barry Weisleder. He's a union organizer, writer, editor, teacher, and Federal Secretary of Socialist Action. He is the chair of the NDP Socialist Caucus and is a delegate to the Ontario NDP Provincial Council. He was elected 3 times to the executive board of the Ontario Public Service Union, starting in 1991, and was a longtime delegate to the Toronto York Region Labour Council. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Elizabeth and comrades and friends. Bonjour à tout le monde. Can you hear me? Someone is adjusting my platform. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Start. All right. I'm tempted to say after Jeff's excellent presentation, ditto. But I think the chair that'll be popular with the chair, but I have a little bit more to say about the present situation, especially from the standpoint of socialists active in the Canadian state. But there's no denying the result of the US presidential election means one thing for sure. More hard times are coming. Both major capitalist parties signaled economic protectionism, environmental chaos, and forever wars. A rise in social strife will force greater political clarity within the main contending class forces. There will be less time and space for ambiguity. I've got this thing in front of me. I'm just going to, there we go. There will be more urgency to adopt a clear course of action that favors the dispossessed and the disadvantaged. Ensuing class conflict will shift public opinion to the right or to the left. Which way is most likely? Well, much depends on the political class consciousness and political independence of the working class. So let's begin by defining what we mean by class. Classes exist in society in relation to ownership and control of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. In other words, a class either produces wealth derived from nature that sustains the population, or it expropriates the value produced by labor. Understanding who produces goods and services in society and how that is done is key to understanding the exercise of political power. About 85% of the population in the Canadian state is working class, including family and other dependents. To survive, workers depend on a wage, a salary, or a pension check. They do not own a business, nor do they employ a significant number of wage laborers. Socialism is the political program expressing the interest of the working class for emancipation from exploitation and oppression. But it is not the only program that seeks to win working class support. Bourgeois tendencies, like traditional liberalism and conservatism, try to justify capitalist rule, usually on the basis of so-called balance of interests. Then there is populism. Populism is a political ideology that obscures the reality of class conflict. It tries to conceal the core antagonisms at the point of production between the major classes. It aims particularly to hide the interest of workers to put an end to the system of private profit and wage slavery. Populism champions the idea of the people in opposition to an established elite. Most often, it is a right-wing ideology, but there are left-wing populists as well. Populism has a long history in Canada. It continues to be an important factor in Canadian political culture and public life. In Canada, there have been right-wing populist parties, for example, the Social Credit Party, Les Créditistes in Quebec, and the Western-based Reform Party. Left-wing populist parties include the United Farmers of Alberta and the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the forerunner of the New Democratic Party. All populists claim to speak on behalf of ordinary people who have been betrayed in some way by an elite establishment. All forms of populism explain the distribution of power and the operation of basic social institutions in terms of a basic antagonism between the people and power elites. Varieties of left-wing populism identify large capitalist firms and mainstream political parties as the power elites. They see the people as a natural coalition of wage workers, farmers, the poor, the middle class, plus aggrieved business owners and corporate nationalist patriots. Varieties of right-wing populism, like most conservative ideologies, support minimal regulation of the capitalist market economy. For them, the power elite is some combination of state bureaucrats, interventionist politicians, and special interest groups who propose more state intervention in social and economic life, and occasionally the financial interests. According to right-wing populists, the people are all those folks who are not represented by the special interests. It includes small capitalists, middle-sized capitalists, even large capitalists who claim to oppose giant monopoly capital control of society. Canadian left-wing populism emerged primarily from farmers' movements in Ontario and the three prairie provinces in the first half of the 20th century, including the United Farmers of Canada, the Saskatchewan section, the Nonpartisan League, and the United Farmers of Alberta. Through these movements, activists often gained experience with direct democracy and formed farmers and consumers cooperatives to combat big business. Labor activists between 1880 and 1930 were also distinctly left populist, as they attempted to build cross-class coalitions against big business and liberal or conservative parties. Canada's classic expression of social democratic populism was the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the CCF, which was formed in 1932. The CCF brought together farmer and labor movement activists from the prairies and other regions. It criticized capitalism and proposed limited state ownership and planning, as well as major welfare state measures. The CCF formed North America's first social democratic government in Saskatchewan under Tommy Douglas in 1944 and held government power there for 20 years. Social democracy in Canada has always incorporated cross-class populist appeals while it shuns revolutionary anti-capitalist change. It seeks social stability via minor reforms and wealth redistribution within the framework of capitalism, despite its frequent crises. It evades social transformation, and it is allergic to the idea of the triumph of workers' power. Workers' power would put an end to exploitation and inaugurate a democratically planned economy. In Quebec, the Parti Québécois combined participatory left populism with Québécois nationalism under René Lévesque's leadership in the 1970s and early 1980s. In the 1990s, New Democratic Party leaders Glenn Clark in British Columbia and Roy Romanow in Saskatchewan used left populist slogans and won second terms for their governments. Their campaigns portrayed other parties as instruments of big business that would slash social programs. Traditionally, the federal NDP has promoted a left populist message with varying degrees of electoral success. When the NDP claims to be the voice of ordinary people, it is indulging in populism. The decision of Jagmeet Singh to prop up the federal Liberal minority government for over 2 years severely damaged the reputation of the NDP as populist, much less socialist. The best representative of historical right-wing populism is the Social Credit League in Alberta, which formed governments under William Aberhart, 1935 to 1943, and Ernest Manning, 1943 to 1968. That's quite a stretch. Social credit initially blended unorthodox economic theory. They actually tried to issue prosperity certificates to all Albertans, which is why they were called the funny money people. It fostered antagonism toward central Canadian banks, along with fundamentalist Christianity, anti-Semitism, and authoritarian leadership. It gradually evolved into a party that promoted conservative social values, opposition to national social programs, and pro-big business government. In Quebec, from the 1940s through the 1960s, authoritarian right populist parties included Maurice Duplessis' Union Nationale Party and the Federal Creditiste Party led by Réal Coët. The Reform Party, led by Preston Manning, was the voice of right-wing populism in Canada in the 1990s. The party demanded an elected Senate, drastic budget and tax cuts, the replacement of existing social welfare programs by private charity, the defense of so-called traditional family values, and no constitutional distinct society status for Quebec. It proposed the use of referenda on issues such as official languages, capital punishment, affirmative action, and deficit financing by governments. According to the Reform Party, this would neutralize the political influence of special interests and old-line parties. In the 1997 election, federal election, Reform became the official opposition. But with all of the party's 60 MPs coming from the West and no prospect of any seats in Quebec, Reform lacked credibility as a cross-country alternative governing party. In 2000, it formed the short-lived Canadian Alliance Party in an attempt to unite the right. It is a source of amusement that the acronym of the Canadian Reform Alliance Party is CRAP. I kid you not. Conservative provincial politicians also used the language of populism in the 1990s. Alberta Premier Ralph Klein and Ontario Premier Mike Harris promised to fight the establishment or the special interests, waging a common sense revolution on behalf of ordinary citizens. In the 21st century, populism became the term used increasingly to describe political developments around the world. In the United States, for example, right-wing populism was linked to the election and now the re-election of Donald Trump as president. In Canada, right-wing populism contributed to the elections of Toronto Mayor Rob Ford in 2010, Ontario Premier Doug Ford in 2018, and Alberta Premier Jason Kenney in 2019. In federal politics, Maxime Bernier founded the People's Party of Canada in 2018, referring to it as an example of smart populism. Bernier was an MP who nearly won the leadership of the Conservative Party. He came very, very close. Doug Ford promises every Canadian resident a check for $200. Who here is going to refuse that? Doug Ford promises it, and it's to go to the very richest people as well as everybody else. Now that's populism in practice. At the same time, the gross underfunding of public health care and education and the dire shortage of affordable housing are serenely ignored by the Ford brand of populism. Although some conservative politicians employ the language of populism to gain power, their policies have centralized power in their governments or transferred it to private elites in the marketplace. Tax cuts, social service reductions, and getting tough on law and order issues are presented as giving power back to the people, who are conceived more as consumers than as citizens, much less as surplus value producing working people. The capitalist welfare state is portrayed as the unaccountable scourge of hard-working taxpayers, i.e. the people. In this scenario, social welfare recipients, the poor, and holders of secure union jobs are presented as the enemies of the people. Back to basics government is held up as the people's only hope. Contemporary right-wing populists build their appeal on middle-class insecurities about employment, status, security, and future well-being. It should be noted that fascists are often populists, but not all right-wing populists are fascists. The Nazi Party that ruled Germany from 1933 through 1945 was extremely populist. For the sake of popularity, it even incorporated the word socialist into the party name. It was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. But the key words in Nazi are national and German. They promote racism and nationalism, quite counter to internationalism, which is a credo deeply rooted in socialism. As Leon Trotsky explained in his famous writings on the subject, fascism is a mass movement of petty bourgeois reaction that is utilized to crush an insurgent revolutionary working class movement. You want me to repeat that? Fascism is a mass movement of petty bourgeois reaction that is used to crush an insurgent working class movement. Although there is no fascist movement in Canada or the United States, and no insurgent workers' movement there or in most places, ultra-right-wing politicians are always seeking big business patronage and are testing the ground for fascist ideas as capitalism descends deeply into crisis and barbarism. The Trump-like Pierre Poilievre is an example of this phenomenon. Maxime Bernier even more so. They're testing. The revival of populism reflects the fact that many Canadians increasingly distrust politicians, political parties, and governments and feel great insecurity concerning the future. No wonder. The world economy sputters, it fits and starts, wages lag far behind inflation, and high interest rates prevail. While inflation rates are falling from their peak in 2022, and as supply blockages lift and manufacturing recovers, however weakly, the damage has been done. On average, prices for most people in the advanced capitalist world have risen 20% since the end of the pandemic and are still rising. It's even worse in many countries and in many middle-income economies like Argentina, where it's 150%, Turkey 50%. As a result, real incomes for average households have fallen since 2019. In effect, this is the biggest drop in living standards for decades. Canada's population struggles with housing, transportation, and food costs. Life expectancy is in decline in this country. There is a dire shortage of teachers and primary care doctors. Meanwhile, profits are surging for the corporate giants, especially for big pharma, banks, huge retail and grocery chains. But for the average person, the prognosis is rising debt. For young workers, it is the gig economy and low wages that breed deep anxiety. With populist sentiments on the rise, more politicians will borrow the style and language of populism. You can be sure of that. However, the main stated goal of traditional populist parties, grassroots control by citizens over the main institutions in their lives, is impossible to deliver due to the vagueness of the term control and the equally hazy notion of the people. Pierre Poilievre captured the leadership of the Conservative Party in 2022. His version of right-wing populism is expressed in the oft-repeated mantra, feel free to say after me, axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime. I'm almost determined to give up watching hockey games because I'm sick of that commercial. Poilievre's call to eliminate the federal carbon tax resonates with workers who feel squeezed. Ignored, however, is the climate crisis. Absent is a plan to tax giant polluters instead of heavily burdening consumers. Remember, there are no jobs or homes under 10 meters of water, nor in the eye of a hurricane. Just ask anyone in Florida. PP, that's what I'm going to call Pierre, would increase war spending to satisfy NATO and Trump. He urges Israel to bomb Iran and wishes to see the Houthis of Yemen blacklisted along with the Palestine Prisoners' Rights Organization, Samidoun, in this country. He'd cancel the $4.4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund and scrap the federal $5 billion Housing Infrastructure Fund. Instead of creating a national housing construction authority to actually build decent, affordable accommodation, he would rely on the free market to build affordable housing. He proposes to defund the CBC. He aims to further cut the level of immigration, which he links to major crime. Again, shades of Trump. Unsurprisingly, he does not propose to prosecute the crimes of monopoly price fixers like the major telecoms and the giant food store chains. Just for good measure, PP is willing to entertain COVID conspiracy mongers like those who populated the so-called Freedom Convoy that blocked borders and occupied downtown Ottawa, providing a haven for far-right agitators sporting Nazi flags. Social polarization and right-wing populists in Parliament emboldened neo-Nazis and alt-right folks. The latest wave of attacks on women's reproductive rights and on trans people demonstrates vicious targeting, which must be repudiated. But the solution is not to call on the state to outlaw the radical rightists. Direct mass action by labor unionists, leftists, and allies can ensure that there will be no platform for fascists and racists. That's how to stop them. Trudeau's Emergency Powers Act risks more attacks on the left. The new Cold War is heating up. Needed is an anti-war united front focused on opposing the actions of the NATO powers and their subaltern states. Washington is targeting Russia, Eastern Europe, China, Venezuela, Cuba, the Middle East, and Africa. Socialist Action opposes the war drive of the Western capitalist rulers against China and Russia. At the same time, we oppose the Eastern despots and their corporate elites. We strive for independent working class political action everywhere, especially on both sides of the inter-imperialist conflict over Ukraine. We say, free the anti-war prisoners in Russia, free the anti-authoritarian detainees in China, celebrate the release of Julian Assange. Proponents of multipolarity, like trying to foster multiple establishments globally, such as the Progressive International, the International Manifesto Group, and the Friends of Socialist China, are pushing a project of class collaboration. They wish to ally with lesser imperialist powers and with pro-capitalist and Stalinist regimes that are at odds with US imperialism. It reminds us of the fatally flawed non-aligned movement launched at the Asian African Conference in Bandung, Indonesia in 1955. That movement terminated in the October 1965 bloodbath in Indonesia, which saw the PKI obliterated while its progressive partners watched. China is a deeply deformed worker state whose authoritarian leadership is in partnership with foreign and domestic capital, moving back and forth between the boundaries of public ownership and the restoration of private ownership capitalism. Thanks to still dominant state economic planning, many millions of Chinese have been lifted out of poverty. That's a good thing. The Belt and Road Initiative is a major element of the post-Mao Stalinist bureaucracy's global strategy. The CCP exploits the natural resources of many less developed countries, albeit at a lower profit margin than the rate extracted by Western firms. Due to the private housing market system in China, there are millions of empty accommodations and an inflationary housing bubble. Income disparity in the People's Republic of China is growing and now approaching US proportions. For reference, I encourage you to read Monthly Review magazine, July-August 2023, an article called Planned Degrowth, particularly pages 16 and 17, which discusses socialism with Chinese characteristics. At the center of the CCP rule is national oppression of the Uyghur and Tibetan peoples and other minorities who are victims of Great Han chauvinism. The brutal suppression of workers' democracy in Hong Kong, the outlaw of strikes, and the ban of unions that are independent of the authoritarian state show how far from socialism the PRC is in practice. It underscores the need for a political revolution in China to inaugurate workers' power. Of course, none of it justifies Washington's military buildup in the South China Sea and across Asia. Beijing is correct to seek reintegration of Taiwan, which was seized by reactionary opponents of the Chinese Revolution in 1949. Socialists defend China against imperialist attack. But in terms of strategy for the world working class, it is important to be crystal clear on this point. The CCP offers no clear path forward to socialism, nor to national and social liberation and workers' power. None. Its hands-off approach to the genocide in Gaza is an odious example. Did you know that China is Israel's third largest trade partner? It's as an alternative to the narrow self-interest of a bureaucratic machine, SA proposes the building of a revolutionary workers' party in every land. We seek to agitate and organize independently for socialist transformation of society, not to support lesser evil capitalist powers or the despotic authoritarian rulers of a deformed worker state. That's all part of the fight against populism. Being clear and forging a way forward, and not to be beguiled. Socialist action is in the forefront of solidarity with the Palestinian people, especially in the face of Zionist genocide against the residents of Gaza, the IDF settler pogroms in the West Bank, and the merciless bombardment of Lebanon. The defense of the Palestinians means upholding freedom of speech and assembly, which increasingly are under attack by police and governments which conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism in their bid to silence opponents of genocide and apartheid. The two-state solution proposed by liberal Zionists, backed by the big powers and by Stalinist parties, is neither viable nor just. It would reduce Palestine to a few disconnected, impoverished Bantustans. We continue to demand Zionist ceasefire now, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the Zionist state and economy for the right of return for all refugees, smash the apartheid Zionist state, defeat the accomplices of Israel among the reactionary Arab and Muslim regimes for a democratic secular Palestine. The whole Arab nation is oppressed by imperialism, but only the workers and farmers led by a Revolutionary Workers' Party can liberate the Arab nation from the clutches of the US empire through a process of permanent revolution. Clearly, the physical capacity of the socialist left to block arms shipments to Israel is limited. Nonetheless, anti-war groups have successfully interrupted business as usual at weapons manufacturers. Efforts to shift public opinion towards solidarity with Palestine should continue. This includes denunciation of the opportunism of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, who falsely equated a Palestinian flag waver in front of a Jewish hospital with the evil of anti-Semitism. We condemn Marit Stiles, who booted Sarah Jama from the caucus of the Ontario NDP MPPs for the crime of calling for a ceasefire without condemning Hamas equally. The campaign to reinstate Sarah Jama will be a feature of the Ontario NDP convention, January 17th to 19th in Toronto. Socialist Caucus resolutions and its candidates for party executive will lead the fight. Tel Aviv brazenly pushes 2 million Gazans into an early grave or onto the Sinai Desert. At the same time, establishment political hypocrites talk about democracy and freedom while seeking to curb the free expression of anti-Zionist views. Don't forget that the first reflex of Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow was to ask the police to disallow a pro-Palestinian march. Shame. However, the movement is pushing back, increasingly winning the battle for public opinion. Populism remains a tool of mass confusion. Ontario Premier Doug Ford pledges to send a $200 check to every resident of the province, as I said. He proposes to build a tunnel for cars under a major highway and to usurp municipal authority to rip up bicycle lanes rather than fund mass public transit. At a time when decent housing is unavailable to young workers, when food bank use is at an all-time high, when 1 million disabled Canadians live below the poverty line, populist right-wingers say, let them eat cake. Socialists insist that the fundamental problem facing humanity is the outmoded, life-crushing world capitalist system. The toxic profit system and its greedy ruling class can be overcome only by the organized working class led by a disciplined Revolutionary Workers' Party. The transformation of society cannot be achieved by an amalgam of classes, including so-called progressive capitalists. It cannot be done by the people, undefined. Capitalism cannot be toppled by workers with illusions in lesser evilism. Those who are prepared to support liberals as a lesser evil to Pierre Poilievre and the Tories, and those who voted for Kamala Harris to stop Donald Trump simply perpetuate a cruel system bent on war, austerity, and environmental devastation. Professor Brian Palmer put it this way, quote, many on the left have been prone to proclaim that with the arrival of Trump on the political scene, fascism is already here. This kind of undiscerning labeling can be seen in Trotsky's words as, quote, an attempt to make easier the appeal of social democratic liberal elements. They say that the lesser evil of bourgeois democracy, however craven, should necessarily command the allegiance of the masses. With Trump poised to assume power and vanquish democracy, establishing fascism, the liberal order, and the crisis-ridden capitalism that is its economic counterpart, having given rise to the very Bonapartist politics paving the way to fascism, must be shored up electorally and a program of class struggle deflected. That's what the liberals say and do. The road to socialist freedom urgently requires the triumph of class struggle over class collaboration. It requires the conscious rejection or populist toxins like the Stalinist Popular
1
Front
minute.
and demands instead the Workers' United Front. It desires the displacement of pro-capitalist ideas like multipolarity. Socialism poses instead the anti-imperialist United Front. From Turtle Island to Palestine, the agency of workers and the oppressed must be at the forefront. Dash all illusions of third world dictators and pro-imperialist schemers and labor fakers. Push aside the pretenders to the mantle of liberation, those who are tied by 1,000 threads to the dominant system. Our goal is the self-emancipation of the working class and the oppressed. There can be no substitute for the real thing. In conclusion, how to proceed? In order to win the working class for socialism, the fight for class struggle politics must be waged inside the mainstream workers' organizations, including unions and the labor-based NDP. Participate in this crucial effort by joining the Workers' Action Movement and the NDP Socialist Caucus. WAM opposes concessions bargaining and demands greater union democracy. The Socialist Caucus fights for socialist policies and radical candidates at all levels of the NDP without any illusions in social democracy. The most effective, steadfast tactics and strategy with a primary focus on the working class demands revolutionary leadership. And that is what Socialist Action, not so humbly, offers to provide. And together we can win. There's no time to spare. Join us today to make a better world possible. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Kamath. Okay, so now we're going to open the floor for interventions or questions. Each participant will get up to 3 minutes. I will take 3 questions, and then I will go back to the panel for their response, giving them a time at that time when I get to 3 questions. So I will try to go between here in the room and online. So the floor is open. If you're online, please put your virtual hand up. If you're in the room, you know what to do. Oh my goodness, everybody shy?
All questions answered.
I guess so.
For long presentations.
Yes, very
Cover
long.
the gamut.
Okay, so it's 25 after, so let's get our questions out because the next session starts at 3. So are there any questions? I don't see anybody's hand up on the screen. Do you, anybody?
John is writing
Yeah,
furious.
John is ready in the room. Okay, John O, go ahead. You got 3 minutes.
You're gonna have to speak up, maybe go use the mic there.
Hello, everybody, especially Jeff out in sunny California. It's been 10 years since I saw you before the pandemic. Nice to see you. And everybody else who's out there. I thought there'd be some other questions, so I just wrote down a few little thoughts you can answer. This last election, unfortunately, 52% of the population of the United States believes in what Trump says. He's pretty clear. Trump's message is pretty clear. 52% believe in it. And it doesn't matter if it's Trump or anybody else. This is what they've now come to be convinced is true, that we need to stop immigration. And I'm sorry to say, but stopping immigration is just a backdoor way for racism to show itself. People won't be openly racist, but they can get away with saying, no, we want to stop immigration from other parts of the world because they're different than us. Believe me, it's a backdoor to racism. So Americans also support, the tariffs. Now, the tariffs are definitely going to hurt working class consumption to begin with, that's for sure. And they put out the story that China, the main target, they actually pay the tariffs. China doesn't pay the tariffs. The importer pays the tariffs. So if you're importing steel from China, China says, this is our price, take it or leave it. It's the United States distributor is going to buy that steel. They pay the tariff, okay? So, and the prices of goods for American workers will go up. So tariffs are not just a sole answer to the economic problems, but Trump's just say, oh, tariffs are good. No, they're not always. High tariffs are not good. Finally, foreign policy. Unfortunately, between the two parties, the American populace believes in these foreign wars. Unfortunately, although I think a lot of them, Barry, you were saying a lot of the popular vote didn't turn out, dropped by about 12 million votes or something. I think a lot of people, they stayed home. They couldn't support the Democrats because they're warmongers, and they can't support Trump either because he doesn't seem to be all that much different. But we're closer to a nuclear war, I think, than ever before in my lifetime, and it's ridiculous. It's over what? Over the Gazans don't have a right to live in peace, and the Russians speaking people in the east of Ukraine don't have a right for a little homeland of their own. The Crimea, unfortunately, study history. It's never been part of Ukraine. It's been historically part of Russia. You gotta know the history. People don't know the history. Anyway, just those are three things: the foreign policy, tariffs, and immigration. You and Jeff could talk on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Tom, online?
Yeah, just a small question or something that crossed my mind when Jeff was speaking and Barry. Could you discuss the role of evangelical Christianity in relation to these populist movements? It seems like it's often seems to be a factor, and there's some materialist origins perhaps for that, but I just wondered why that seems to come with the package. I'm not sure that's been the case in other countries or not, but anyways, just a question.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Julius?
Thank you. My question is about, well, it's in relation to the results of the election in the States. It was mentioned that 1,200 votes essentially were not cast of what would be expected in terms of what's happened in previous elections. The third parties, there were multiples, none of them achieved more than, I think, half of 1%. I'm, seeing a lot of blame going around by liberals as to who's responsible for their loss of the election. Of course, our perspective is that even a Democratic win would be a loss for the working class, but I think it's clear that the Democrats have no one to blame but themselves. My question is that, this opposition that we do see, that we're seeing, and in some cases apathy, but I'm talking about the organized opposition, has not manifested into a political movement anywhere, even amongst liberals who are like in complete denial of their role in the defeat, mistakes that they could have made. I'm not talking about the high level. I mean, I don't care what they think. I'm talking about their supporters. They refuse to acknowledge the role the Democrats have had in facilitating genocide in Palestine, or in not solidifying women's rights. The Democrats have been in power in the United States more often than the Republicans have. There's always been an opportunity for them to strengthen human rights, and they have not done so. So I want to know, what's it going to take? What's it going to take for the masses to basically organize, to decide that it's time to organize? Because my concern, and the concern of many people, is that we're running out of time, that there's a finite amount of time. I'm not talking about my lifetime, I'm talking about climate change in particular. That we have, as John mentioned, the increase of threat of nuclear war. And it seems that if anything would galvanize people, it would be genocide. And it's not happening.
30 seconds.
I feel that as a leader or somebody who's been active in the labor movement, that we reached our peak a while ago, months ago, in terms of participation at actions in support of Palestine. And this is with the work of activists in our unions to change the direction and policy of our unions, to actually have the leadership say, come out to these rallies, we want you to be there. They don't show up. So they don't show up. A handful will show up. We have 180,000 members in OPSU. I don't think we've ever had more than 20 or 30 show up.
Wrap up.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I see. Pardon?
Will you take mine?
Oh, I didn't see your hand.
Oh, no. I just raised my hand.
Oh, you just raised your hand now. Okay, yes, of course. We will take one more question. Just a second, comrade. Take one more question, and then we'll go back to the online. Let's see a couple hands up there. Okay, so Rubina, and then we're going to go back to the panel.
It's too high for me.
Oh, hold down.
It's okay. I think everyone can hear my voice. Barry, from Bangladesh, when Trump won, people actually text me, many of them, around 50 people. They're happy in back home because the color revolution or pseudo revolution, what happened in July in Bangladesh, Clinton Foundation funded for that. They sent arms, they sent money to make that massacre. And they are telling that they removed fascist government, but now every day they are killing people inside their house, on the street. This huge massacre from July to till now. So liberal people in Bangladesh, they're happy because democratic didn't own. And also, I went to for a few days ago, one of the Afghan people, there were some gathering, and they said, oh, Palestine will be free, not free, but at least they will get the ceasefire because democratic are not here. So these things are actually from outside of the North America or the West, the eastern part. They are happy because they don't want democratic, but they do around the world. To us, actually, for the eastern country or the Arab world, democratic and republican, then they're same to us. So
Okay.
think about
Thank
it.
you. Okay, so we're going to go back to the panel now, and we're going to give them 4 minutes, 4 minutes each. Not a lot of time, but we don't have a lot of time. And I'm going to start with Barry and then Jeff. Barry, 4 minutes.
Right, so thanks for the questions and look forward to more questions and dialogue. Well, John is correct to note that the level of voter participation declined, actually quite a bit. It declined from 54% to 46% overall. It was actually more than 10 million votes, 12 million votes. The Democrats received 12.5 million fewer votes than they did in 2020. And the Republican Party and its candidate Trump received 2.5 million votes less than it did. So what's the significance of that? I think the lack of enthusiasm for the candidates offered by the two main parties of Wall Street and the Pentagon shows that people had enough of the Biden-Harris administration, and they weren't particularly inspired by Trump. So you have both parties trying to mobilize their hardcore, and the hardcore of the Democratic Party coalition since FDR is disintegrating. I think that can be said with some confidence. But it tells us one more thing, and that is the Trump administration does not enjoy an overwhelmingly strong mandate. It's a weaker mandate than it would have attained had the rate of participation been significantly higher and its margin of victory. So the major media does not focus on this question, and the reason is because it's apparent to anyone who thinks about it that there's a certain level of vulnerability in the newly elected executive in the United States, and that continuing actions to organize the unorganized and to oppose imperialist wars and environmental devastation have a reasonable expectation of gaining ground. This could be a very unpopular government within a couple of years. I think that's a reasonable expectation. We shall see. Immigration and racism. Why do immigration is manipulated particularly from third world centers as a justification for racist policies on a whole number of levels. But the question that should be asked, and that we need to ask more frequently on the revolutionary left, is why do people emigrate? This is not a course of advanced tourism. People are not coming here for the pleasure of seeing Niagara Falls. They're coming out of abject, economic desperation. Changing climate, people are at the brink of starvation. Crops are failing. Trade is in danger, and people are desperate. That's why dozens of people die almost every day trying to cross the Mediterranean from North Africa into Italy.
30 seconds.
Evangelical Christianity. Well, Tommy Douglas was a man of the cloth. The evangelicals do have a habit of seeking a new world, but they don't have the program or the political tools to achieve it, other than to invoke a Holy Spirit. The crimes of the Democrats. When will people be galvanized? There are more people now mobilized against the genocide unfolding in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon than mobilized against the genocidal war in Vietnam. It took 6 or 7 years to attain this level of opposition. And so I think we're on course to continue building a movement which is manifestly powerful and which will make its mark.
Thank you. Jeff, 4 minutes.
Thanks. First, I reject the idea that Trump is a fascist. He is a pseudo-fascist, wannabe fascist, but he does not represent what the ruling class in the United States wants, and that is a fascist dictatorship. Because the ruling class believes they can rule with impunity with a two-party system and carry out their basic objectives to try to shore up a declining capitalism. But unlike in Nazi Germany, a mass Communist Party and Socialist Party trade union movement that outvoted the Nazis and that had the potential to take power, the trade union movement today, tragically, is the lowest point in the modern era, with less than 6% of the private sector working class in unions. The ruling class prefers to rule through, quote, democracy, where workers voluntarily contribute their labor rather than where they constantly challenge the foundations of the capitalist state, which was the threat that Hitler's bourgeoisie faced. Barry's statistics are revealing. Trump got roughly 2 million votes less than his last presidential elections, but Kamala Harris got more than 12 million less. And that is, the American people are opposed to the basic policies of the government in place, which is the genocidal Joe Biden government. Interestingly, I think 7 out of 9 of the referendum on abortion rights passed across the country. And an 8th would have passed, except it required a supermajority, got a majority. In Urbana, Illinois, a referendum on the war was put on the ballot, and it passed 70% to 30%. And in most counties, it got 80% saying no aid to Israel. That's a sentiment that runs deep in America, but it was not given any reflection. On the opposition parties like Cornel West was a minor irritant or less. They moved him off the ballot in most states, but he basically was a campaign staffer for Bernie Sanders and a lifelong Democrat and offered no serious opposition. And Jill Stein got in the Michigan referendum, she got 13% of the votes because the Arab American community was ticked off at the Democrats' genocidal war. So they passed an opposition vote. The capitalist elections are a charade. They have no correspondence to the interests or feelings or moods, in my opinion, of the American people. Trump won because the ruling class had no choice but to continually impose austerity, to cut back education, social services, destroy the environment, continue fracking, continue wars everywhere in the world.
30 seconds.
American people are not pro-war. They have never been pro-war. And whenever they get a chance in the face of a mass movement to vote, they vote to bring the troops home now. I'm optimistic about the future. The fact that we recruited some good people, including the leader of the Assange defense, tells us that people are looking for significant revolutionary alternatives. The fact that a combination of people, including evangelicals, right-wingers, and trade unionists who are Trumpites, voted for Trump is an indication of the vast alienation from the Democratic Party politics, from its incapacity to solve the problems of working people, jobs, wages, unemployment, massive inflation, prices, and all the other horrors attendant to the capitalist system. So I'm optimistic. Barry did point out that we have some differences with Socialist Actions Canada and between and Socialist Action in the United States. We differ on Ukraine, and we differ on the nature of China. We think it's a capitalist imperialist state with 1 million billionaires and whose integrated into the U.S. imperialist economy. They're the main trading partner of the United States, not only Israel and everywhere. If we're a worker state, it would be largely excluded from the world economy. But we have time and goodwill to discuss and debate this as the facts come in. In the meantime, the Trump election will not bring about fascism as much as Trump's rhetoric promised that. And any attempt to impose repressive role, in my opinion, will be met by a rising youthful anti-war movement, which is already demonstrated in the hundreds of thousands in the United States, but is led currently by a sectarian current rather than the United Front, democratic, mass action-oriented anti-war movement that we need to bring into being.
Time's up, Comrade.
Potential for which is real. Thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful conference.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, let's see. Gary, you still got your question? You were the only hand that was up. You're on. Okay, go ahead, Gary. You're muted. It's a lovely scene, though. Lots of cars.
No, my hand is down.
Oh, your hand is down now? Oh, okay. I know it's down, but I didn't know if you accidentally or what. Okay, so then I don't see any other hands, and we've ran out of time anyway, because the next session is going to start at 3. So, but I will give our panelists 2 minutes. 2 minutes each if they have something that they want to say. If not, then that's fine too. So, Jeff, any last words?
No, I'm satisfied. We'll continue the discussion on important differences as we always do. We appreciate the work and growth of Socialist Action Canada its ranks and its leadership, and I'm very proud to participate.
We're glad to have you, comrade. Love to you and Carol. And get well soon. Barry? 2 minutes.
Well, we're proud and delighted to collaborate with our comrades in the United States. Some people ask me, how do you think you're going to establish socialism in Canada? There will be tremendous resistance, particularly by the American superpower. This is assuming that nothing changes. Nothing is permanent but change. A great ancient Greek philosopher once said, nothing is permanent but change. And we're counting on our comrades in the United States and the broader workers' movement in that country to build a movement of solidarity that will constrain the American ruling class from attempting to curb, much less to smash, an insurgent working class movement in this country. So we have a profound interest in working together, whatever occasional differences we may have on some programmatic issues. I'm just going to conclude finally by saying what I did in my talk at its conclusion. If people who are watching this recorded conference on YouTube in the future, or today watching live across the country, across North America, and in this room, if you want to bring about change, we have to engage in the fight for revolutionary working class leadership, class struggle leadership, not against or for the people, but for the workers, to abolish the capitalist system by putting the working people in command of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. And the way to advance that prospect is to educate through experience in struggle in the unions, by building the Workers' Action Movement and other class struggle bodies, and fighting to remove the right-wing bureaucrats, and in the NDP Socialist Caucus, which is waging the fight there exclusively because the NDP is a labor-based political party, not for any love for the current leadership in Ontario or federally or anywhere else. So join the Socialist Caucus. If you're seeing this, join the Workers' Action Movement. Support the Municipal Socialist Alliance, support all the endeavors to bring solidarity to the Palestinian people, to stay the hand of imperialism, and to diffuse the potential for a nuclear conflagration. I too worry that we are closer to it now than ever before. But the working class controls all the mechanisms that can put in motion a devastating war, and also that can stop it in its tracks. That's where our hope lies, and I too am optimistic that we shall overcome. Thanks.
Okay, so thanks once again, Barry and Jeff. And I don't know if everybody is following the chat, but if you haven't, I think you should go in and take a look and read what Imogen Xavier has to say, because I think it's powerful words that she's using. Okay, so now we will adjourn this session, and the next one starts at 3 if everybody is there on time. Okay, so thanks, hang around. Hopefully more will join us, and we'll see you in a few minutes.